Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining. My name is Laura MacDonald, and I'm the Managing Director of the Climate Innovation Collaboratory here at CU Boulder and the Mortensen Center in Global Engineering and Resilience. Thank you all for joining us today. For recording purposes, today is April 13th, and the time is 11 a.m., and this is the panel titled Green Jobs and Careers. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that Boulder is on the ancestral homelands and unceded territory of Indigenous peoples who have traversed, lived in, and stewarded lands in the Boulder Valley since time immemorial. Those Indigenous nations include the Apache, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, Pawnee, Shoshone, Sioux, and Ute. One other thing I'd like to mention is that we do want to be sure you get a chance to ask questions. So this is how we'll handle the Q&A for those not familiar with the CWA way. We'll reserve the end of the discussion for Q&A, and in the meantime, throughout the panel, we're using a note card system to receive questions from the audience. So at any time in the session, simply raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers, who are holding those up right now in the back. And they will bring you a card and a pencil from one of the producers. Please write legibly. If you are a student, please note this on your question card. And when you finish, raise your hand so the producer can collect them and bring them up to me. And I urge everyone to make your questions brief and to the point. And so now, to get us started, I'd like to do a brief introduction of each panelist. And for more information on them, you can find their full bios on the CWA website. So first, we have Mary Wenzel, who is the Managing Director of Corporate Engagement at the Nature Conservancy. Before joining TNC in June, Mary was Executive Vice President and Head of Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility at Wells Fargo. There, she led the development of the company's climate commitment that set a goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and deployment of $500 billion in sustainable finance by 2030. Mary has more than 20 years of experience in environmental sustainability in both the public and private sectors. And I just learned that Mary was one of the first remote workers here in Boulder when she moved here in 2007. Next, we have Kim. Kim Oster is the Chief Strategy Officer for Forum Mobility, where she is responsible for developing their corporate strategy to become the leading zero-emission fleet and infrastructure provider for heavy-duty trucking. In addition to this role, Kim is a co-founder of Point Reyes, which is a women-owned renewable energy development company. Kim has more than 30 years of industry experience and has developed and financed over $4.5 billion in power projects. And I know from prior conversations before today that Kim believes that every corporate job is a green job, so I encourage y'all to drill down into that in your questions. Crystal Upperman is a senior manager in Deloitte's Government and Public Services Consulting practice, helping to deliver best-in-class sustainability, climate adaptation, and climate equity support to clients. Her past experience spans work that intersects environmental management, climate change, and environmental health. Crystal served on the Biden-Harris campaign's Climate, Energy, Environment Policy Committee, and she currently serves on the US EPA's Board of Scientific Counselors. And Crystal kindly joined us coming back from her honeymoon in Japan, so this is a nice stopover on her way back to DC.
And a 10-year anniversary.
Kirk, and it's a 10-year anniversary. So Kirk, your job is to poke Crystal as she starts to fall asleep.
Okay. I have a lot of experience in jet lag. So, yeah.
And then last but not least, Kirk Siegler is a national correspondent for NPR News and an alum of CU Boulder. So Kirk covers the western US from his base in Boise, Idaho. And in his reporting, Kirk explores the urban-rural divide with an emphasis on the effects of climate change on smaller communities and former natural resource-dependent towns. Kirk also contributes extensively to the network's breaking news coverage and in fact was one of the first foreign journalists to arrive in and report from Kathmandu after the 2015 earthquake in Nepal. I believe Kirk is also serving on 3 panels today, so thanks to Kirk for dedicating so much. 2?
I'm moderating one.
Oh, moderating 1. Okay. So only 2, which Mary has matched, so not actually that impressive. Oh, Mary's on 3. Shoot. My bad. I'll bow down. All right, so to get us started, there are some differing opinions here around whether all jobs are green jobs or all green jobs are simply jobs. I was interested in getting each of your opinions first on, regardless of your position on that point, what is the future of green jobs and careers, and where do you see the most opportunity for growth is? So Mary, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of growth opportunity, and there's plenty of opportunity to align your values to your career, and you can do that in many ways. As mentioned, I've worked for the public sector, private sector, and the nonprofit sector. Always have been focused on sustainability. That's been the common thread. As building my sustainability team at Wells Fargo, my team consisted of an architect, a math teacher, someone who served on campaigns. So, they came to the sustainability field because it aligned with their values through many different pathways. When I left Wells Fargo, sustainability was owned and embedded across operations, across risk management, in our financing groups, in our retail banking group, in our corporate and investment bank, in our commercial bank. In our legal team, there was folks aligned to our ESG, environmental social governance work. And so I think there are many ways to pursue a career that align with your values. And you can do it with many different educational backgrounds and in many different capacities.
Great. Thanks, Mary. It's really a pleasure to be here amongst this group. And just a little bit, my background really is mostly in the private sector. And I've spent my career trying to help get industries off the ground that are new and green. So my background is in the solar industry and energy storage and EV trucking, which is really taking off. And from my perspective, what I'm really seeing is, we're going to see a lot of the same jobs. Let me step back and say, when I think about green jobs that are growing, those are in industries where they're historically been very carbon intensive, and they're the ones that we have to decarbonize in order to meet our climate change goals. And so starting off with the power sector, which is what I've been in for a long time, we're seeing tremendous growth in jobs because we have to take basically what was mostly conventional fuel and now convert that to zero emission technologies. I'm actually pretty excited. I recently read that the IEA came out and said that for the first time, renewable energy actually produces more electricity in the U.S. Than coal and also nuclear. So that's pretty exciting, but there's still a long way to go. So what does that mean? That means there are a lot of jobs in renewable energy, specifically in the development and construction of renewable energy. Little less so in the operation of renewable energy because, as you can imagine, a solar plant is a lot more passive. There's no combustion, no moving parts, so you don't need as many operators of a solar plant than a coal plant. I'm also seeing tremendous growth in jobs in the transportation sector because that's another sector that we have to decarbonize to meet our goals. And so, there is the Biden administration as part of the bipartisan infrastructure, as well as tax breaks under the Inflation Reduction Act, is putting a lot of incentives into the transition to zero-emission vehicles. Zero-emission vehicles can be either electric or hydrogen are the two main ones. Electric is much further along, and so we're seeing significant job growth if you're interested in developing, constructing, financing charging stations. and also seeing a lot of growth in hydrogen. And that's just to name a couple sectors. And with that, I'll pass it to Crystal.
Thank you. So I mean, both of you have echoed a lot of what I intended to sort of share, but when I don't think I've heard the word jobs as many times presently as I have before, until like my Aunt Hazel. I have a great Aunt Hazel, her soul rest in peace, would always say, when are you going to get a job? I was going to get my master's, I was getting my PhD, and she was insistent, when are you going to get a job? And I think, from this room, we probably have people who are either at the beginning of their career trying to figure out what their life's work is going to be, people who've done their life's work, and you're trying to think out what's your evolution, what's your next phase. So there's a distinguishing factor between a career and a job. So I think you have to take the audience's advice, the panelists' advice in the context of where you are. I went into and pursued a career in the environmental field. I grew up in a EJ community, a community my parents purchased their first home. It was a third of a mile away from a landfill. And I couldn't understand why that was the case. And I realized that the community that I was in was completely different than communities that were just down the street. I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. Industrial era, trade makes the world takes. Just up the street you have Princeton, which is, very high income, wealthy place. And you can see the differences. So that actually catapulted me to understand and figure out why was it this way. And I charted out a path that I wanted to fix that. That was my life's goal and mission, to fix the fact that there are environmental externalities that come out from processes that, are ending up in people's communities. And does that have to be the case? So I do want to say that this next era that we're entering into is a shift in the economy. The economy is shifting. There is going to be opportunities for careers, and there's going to be opportunities for jobs. And it doesn't mean that anyone has to be left behind. I think a lot of the skill sets that, the others have discussed in roles that exist will transfer over into new roles and jobs. But there's going to be a need for a brain trust to figure out how do we solve these problems within processes. For instance, just today, just this morning, I was doing some reading, and 20 of the 40 livestock companies, we're talking about agriculture. Agriculture is like embedded in our economy. We all have to eat. We had breakfast this morning. Where did that food come from? Well, 20 of the 40 main livestock companies will become unprofitable by 2030. That is a huge problem, not only just for jobs, but for bottom line. And those problems actually need solutions. Who's going to solve them? It's the people in the audience here today. It's the next generation of the workforce. So there are opportunities that are happening immediately, but they're really high-level problems that require brain trust to solve. So those are some of the things that I think it would be great to touch on and share today, but I would love to pass it off to Kirk.
Okay. As a reporter, I'm probably not in a position to recommend, where the new jobs are in the green sector. Kind of like we were talking about before. Of course, you weren't there before this started. But to me, it's my observation that most jobs right now are green jobs. It's just kind of a subjective term, and it's changing a lot. And there is certainly a demand for newer technology and highly skilled workers. So I'll give you one example in a story we've been covering in Wyoming. So I was going to pick something that's in our backyard here, where the state of Wyoming is very coal dependent. It is actually the nation's largest coal producer. There aren't a lot of jobs per se in coal. People think West Virginia when they think of coal, but Wyoming's actually in front of West Virginia in terms of coal production. It's a lot more automated. There are a lot of coal-fired power plants in Wyoming that are shutting down because of climate goals basically driven by the West Coast. There's an example of a coal-dependent town in southwestern Wyoming. You're talking about close to privileged places. It's very close to Park City, another hour down the road, but it's like a planet away from Park City. But there's a coal-fired power plant that's shutting down in 2025, and part of the state of Wyoming's plan, or plan in Wyoming, to shutter all the coal-fired power plants by 2039. There's an entrepreneur who you may have heard of from Seattle, who has come in with a big plan to transform this town, basically, and turn the coal-fired power plant that is shutting down in 2025 into a nuclear energy facility. I don't know if you guys know who I'm talking about. He's a small business owner by the name of Bill Gates. So he's coming in, and there's a big question there about whether, I think in simplification terms, like the politicians say, particularly on the left, say, well, we'll just train the coal workers to work at the green energy plant. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. There's also, to my point about green jobs being kind of subjective, there's been debate for decades about whether or not nuclear energy jobs are green jobs. If you ask Bill Gates, they certainly are. So in this town, there's a little bit of a discussion about, can these 300 workers who are about to lose their jobs in 2025 at the coal plant, can they be retrained to work at the new nuclear energy plant, which is set to be built just across the highway? So I'll leave it at that, but we can get more into it.
Yeah, well, that gets into the just transition. This whole idea of the just transition is, how do you make sure that there's an equitable transfer of people who have skills, who've been in one industry that's essentially being divested from, and transitioning those individuals and workers into industries that are receiving investments. The baseline competency, these individuals have had to potentially go to either trade schools, they've gone to, graduate school, potentially. They have an area of expertise, so they have an ability to learn new skill sets and have the basic information to be able to, know technical engineering or know processes. So I think this idea of whether they can be upskilled is not necessarily one to debate on. It's whether or not we want to make sure that there is a conveyor belt to transition people from one field to the other, and how we do that, because it also has to be done equitably. It has to be done how people feel like they actually have dignity and pride. This whole issue of like the coal economy is one that is there's pride embedded in it. People took pride with going to their job every day, putting on their safety gear, going and working hard, and essentially making sure that they were supporting the American economy, providing energy. There's a lot of pride in that. And when you have a career in an industry that's based around pride, you also have to make sure that you manage that transition well by making sure that there is dignity imbued in the transition. So I think a lot of it gets into this notion of the soft aspects and the soft skills necessary to transfer workers from one industry to the other.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to, in 2009 and 10, I had the privilege of working for a company called First Solar, and I developed what was then the largest solar farm in the world. It was 6,000 acres, 550 megawatts, and we were in a rural community. And so what we did was we got together with local community colleges to train folks. But one of the challenges, I think as I mentioned earlier, in renewable energy, is the good news is that we have to make this transition from conventional fuel to renewable. But the truth is there's not going to be a lot of operating jobs. So in the short term, there's a lot of construction jobs, and doing what we can with workforce training. I would say the Biden administration is really helping with that too, and supporting workforce training and moving those jobs. My company that I started in 2016 develops solar and reclaimed coal mines, and that's what we're trying to do. But I will also say that that's for construction. There won't be as many jobs for operating. The good news is that we have a lot of construction to do, a lot of development, but that is one of the challenges.
I was going to add actually really quick. Do you guys remember in 2016 there was a polarized election? Maybe you remember that. And a certain candidate said, I'm going to put all of the coal miners out of work. And most of the sound bites ended there and didn't continue what she then said, which was, and retrain them, to do the jobs of the clean energy future. Trump and everybody else in our current hyper-polarized environment seized on the one thing, but I think what she was getting at is actually way easier said than done. We at NPR have been trying to get the Biden administration, to talk to us, but to explain exactly like what you're doing when you say that, particularly in a state like Wyoming. It's kind of easier said than done. Like as Crystal mentioned, there's all kinds of retraining, different skills. You can't just move from one thing to the other, and maybe some people don't want to.
Right.
But I get that is absolutely correct and right. But I do think with dealing with the climate risks that exist out here, about 800 million jobs globally is going to be impacted by climate change. So we either want to or don't want to. And I do think that it's better to be prepared for shifts that are coming and maintain livelihoods rather than have livelihoods falter. So not speaking in platitudes here, but I do think that the decisions that are being made is such that we want to make sure that we maintain the livelihoods of Americans. And that's something that I think is critical and important. And we want to also maintain the livelihoods of people globally, those who depend on natural resources that are not necessarily renewable. So if your industry depends on a natural resource, you potentially will have to address environmental concerns, and you will need folks who are sustainably and environmentally minded to help you. I mean, we're talking a lot about energy, but water is a big issue. Just the other day, the administration had to intervene on the water issues in the Colorado River Basin. We all hear right now that actually impacts industry. All of the industry that's here that depends on water, they're going to have to address sustainability issues. So it's more broad than just energy. It's water, it's our air quality, it's our healthcare system. It's everywhere. So when we say that every job is going to have an environmental or sustainability component, that is key and critical. Having some working knowledge of the issue and topic and how it will impact your day-to-day will help you transition into a career in which you can help find solutions, because there are a lot of questions to be answered, many questions to be answered, and we need as many people helping to flesh out solutions. So
there are a lot of transitions happening and being discussed here. I think many in the audience and online are looking at the transition from high school to university or university to their first job. And, Crystal, you mentioned the brain trust, and I imagine depth will be needed there with respect to expertise. But throughout, we're talking about how every job is green. And so I wonder if you all could speak to, Mary, you mentioned opportunities for true professionalization of the sustainability field. For the students in the audience, whether high school going into university or university graduating, how would you encourage them to think about the opportunity, but also the tension between whether they want to choose a fully sustainability-focused career or job, or a job that has a different focus but has the opportunity to contribute?
Yeah.
Mary, I'll start with you.
I think it's a great question. When I went to college and graduate school, there weren't sustainability tracks at universities like there are, and there weren't degrees that you can get today in sustainability. And so, as I said, I think the sustainability field is one of those fields that cuts across science, the humanities. You need to be a great writer to communicate. It cuts across many different disciplines, and so that's, I think, and we need many different aptitudes coming into sustainability careers, many different types of expertise and knowledge backgrounds. And so I think it's an opportunity to think, what am I good at, and B, what do I care about, and chart a path that way, because I think there's an opportunity in sustainability if you focus on that, whether you're a data scientist, that's needed in the sustainability arena, or you're a biologist, or you're a business professional, right? All of those careers are needed to support kind of a sustainable trajectory of business. And as we mentioned, I think, now working at the Nature Conservancy, we work with all of the large kind of food and water, food and ag sector companies, because sustainability is more and more material to their both from an opportunity and a risk management perspective. And so, technology companies, energy usage and sustainability is increasingly relevant. The loss of biodiversity is going to impact markets. And so I think, all major companies today have to think about what's material to them from a sustainability perspective. How do they manage it better? How do they transform and do systems change to ensure the viability of their businesses going forward? And that's going to take many different skill sets across many disciplines and functions.
I couldn't agree more. I think for example, in the energy sector, when you're going from coal or gas to renewables, you still need developers, you still need people to finance, you still need construction, you need operations. And as we've talked about, some of those are going to require a change, right? Constructing a solar plant is different than constructing a gas plant, and you do need the retooling. But maybe just even stepping back, I guess, I have two daughters in their 20s. One is developing solar in a little country called Lesotho. The other one's working in real estate in New York. And the career advice I always give to them is do what you care about. Just as you mentioned, Mary, do what you're good at. Also find a field that's growing. That's always really helped me. And then I think the most important thing for me in my career has been that you align with the company or organization that you're joining in terms of their values. And I was very fortunate to have a career with the company for over a decade. Their mission was fun, fairness, social responsibility, and integrity. And just the way they treated each other, the benefits they gave people, everybody in the company had ownership. I love, one of the things, I love a B Corps. I just think that being part of a company that cares more about than the just profit, cares about its stakeholders, is really important to think about when you're starting your career.
Yeah, absolutely couldn't agree more. It's really critical and important to take, your values with you where you go. I do think that a lot of the careers that will come out aren't going to be careers that you've been educated to fit within. When I went to college about over 15, 16 years ago, that's a long time ago, maybe 20. My counting is off. Who's counting? I'm counting.
5 years.
I went to a liberal arts all-girls college in the South, and I was the only environmental science major. Yes, I went to Spelman. The only environmental science major in my class. I was known as the girl that was going to study the bugs and the bees. My friends, they would chuckle every time, but I had a lot of classes with the engineering students. I had a lot of classes with the students who wanted to go to medical school, so the biology and chemistry students. And I think at that point I learned that what I saw as what would be necessary in the future didn't exist yet. And I think for a lot of the students who are looking for a career, realize that the problems that you'll be solving won't be taught. You will learn base skills that will help you enhance your ability to connect various fields of thought and to work with a variety of different people. But it will be incumbent upon you to bring new solutions and ideas into the field, and that requires you to be fearless. So I'd say, a journey into a career of the future will require people to be fearless, but also take a lot of your aptitude and skills that you learn in school with you, and then also having a historical perspective of what has worked in the past and what hasn't worked, and being able to fit that into context will be critical and essential. I think also that there are opportunities to sort of learn a myriad of skills. I mean, communications, if you're a journalist, communicating science is hard. I'm not going to speak for the journalist here, but just communicating science is hard. But if you have a knack for communication and you can speak to people, consider that as a potential area in which you can make sure that there's clear communication about science. There are so many needs in the full spectrum that, there's a place for everyone to fit in with. So I'm not going to belabor that particular point, but I do think that, just even here at UC Boulder, Deloitte has a partnership with UC Boulder where there is a climate innovation collaboratory where students can do a capstone and figure out how to solve pressing day problems. And even doing that can give you a sense of what it would be like in the future to find solutions to cutting edge problems that are out there. But I just think generally overall there's just a wide chasm, and the chasm needs people that are willing to be fearless and willing to take risks to help solve the problems, because people won't see it the way that you see it. I can tell you how many times my parents were like, don't you just want to be a nurse or a doctor? Don't you just want to enlist in the Army? And I was very bullish about doing environmental science, and it wasn't until most recently with the past electoral cycle that, you know, this term environmental health and environmental justice got into just the public lexicon, and it finally clicked for my relatives what I've been spending all of this time working towards. So again, I think that, you know, if you have the ability to see the future that you think you want and think this people in this world deserve, there's opportunity to work towards that.
I agree. I think there's going to be a lot of on-the-job training. I mean, I think that's kind of classic. Like, you learn things in college and then you get into the job and you're like, okay, this is what I actually have to do. But I was in, we mentioned the Colorado River. On last Thursday, I paid a brief visit to the Imperial Valley of California and Yuma, Arizona. It's where 90% of the nation's winter produce comes from. So this Boulder, we can make a kale joke. Trying to work a kale joke into this, but your kale comes from, between November and April, chances are it comes from Yuma, Arizona, or the Imperial Valley of California. And what I detected while I was there was there's going to be a huge need for more scientists, more agronomists, more technicians, maybe restoration people. You've all heard about leave it to the news media to dramatize Deadpool at Hoover Dam. Well, that just means we could be in a year, there may be no water flowing below Hoover Dam and Lake Mead to where we have made a decision to grow most of our winter produce. There will be some water there if we hit Deadpool. They'll have some water around, but it struck me that there's going to be a high demand for big thinkers who can come in and help them do what they've already been working on. I mean, they've done some pretty remarkable things. They managed to cut their water use by 20% in the last 2 decades or so, whilst also increasing their yields by 40%. But I think we can all probably agree that they're going to have to cut way more than that, and they're about to be told they're going to have to be cut more than that. And they also know that, you know, they might sue, so there could be a high demand for attorneys to probably sue the federal government if that comes to that. But I do think there is kind of a growing acknowledgement that we have made these decisions, and you can have the debates. I think there's probably a demand for philosophers too about whether or not we should be growing industrial crops in the arid desert. It hasn't been this dry in 1,200 years in the Southwest, but you're probably not in our lifetimes going to pick up and move this massive infrastructure elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So I think there's going to be a high demand for people who can come in and help these farmers and maybe even start up new farms and farm in a hugely transformative and different way.
So, Crystal, you started out with an environmental justice or injustice example from your childhood. And I know in your work, you also advise clients on climate equity. How would you describe opportunities to students here to think about how to contribute to environmental justice or climate equity, regardless of whether or not their job is focused on that?
Oh, wow. That's a... Well, so when you think about injustices, you just think about the people who are on the margins or living in poverty, whether that's domestically or internationally. And when we see what's happening with climate change and the climate risks that communities are absorbing, those shocks actually will impact people who are on the margins more fiercely. They lack the ability to rebound. Oftentimes they don't have insurance coverage, they lack savings, they lack a network, a social network to help them rebuild. And I think that issue and topic is critical to the intersection of how do we alleviate poverty and how do we alleviate just those imbalances in our society and community, or are we willing to just have, respective individuals and communities perish? It's a really tough problem to discuss, because I think longer than I've been on this earth, we've been trying to solve the issue of how to pull people out of poverty. All of the gains that the World Bank has made on pulling communities out of poverty globally is actually going to be reversed by the climate impacts and shocks that we're seeing. So we're losing investments that we've made already. So I think it comes with how do you show up in life? Like, are you looking to just have a job and a career that meets your needs, or are you seeing yourself as an extension of the broader world? And I know that gets more philosophically than anything, but to me it's a matter of what part of the problem are you willing to take on as your challenge, and being laser focused on it and trying to at least solve modicum of gains or achieve some modicum of gains by doing that. And I can give you a clear example that I'm a product of, actually. So I got into this field by a whim. I was good at science, but there was this program in New Jersey where this one woman who used to be a teacher, her name's Maureen Quinn, used to be a teacher, decided to start this program where she would pair high school students with scientists across New Jersey and have them do a science project every year. And the projects had to be focused on environmental science. And that's how I got into this field, because it became a discovery to me. But this individual, dedicated her life to doing this. She's done this for the past 35 years. Is she rich and wealthy? No. But she's been laser focused on creating a pipeline of individuals who come from inner city communities and then end up in the STEM field. So I think it goes back to the problem that you see as one that you can solve. Be laser focused about it. And I think it gets to just, we're all insignificant doing little, what may seem like insignificant things, but when we do them collectively, they make a pretty large impact. So I think it's being more connected and identifying the problems that we each want to solve. And if we each solve problems collectively, we will have enough progression to move things forward. So that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, and I'll just add on, you can't develop a sustainable solution if it's not an inclusive solution, if you don't involve local communities, indigenous communities, people impacted on the ground in designing that solution. It won't be truly sustainable. You know, there has to be, from a corporate perspective, from an NGO perspective, from a government perspective, there has to be a real intentionality about involving and engaging and empowering local communities in sustainability work and outcomes.
And I will just add, I think one of the exciting features of renewable energy is that conventional energy is very centralized, and much of renewable energy is decentralized. And you start to think, and the good news is that the cost of renewable energy has come down so significantly. I mean, when I started in 2008, a solar panel was $5 a watt. Now it's 20 cents a watt. I mean, that's revolutionary. So what does that mean? That means you can start developing community solar in communities where people can actually save money, where, you know, average American, I think, spends 3% of their income on power, but on electricity, but some people, it's 40%. And so if you can develop cheap community solar, you can then have reduced electricity bills. You can try to, you know, train, as you guys said, it's not easy, but train for local jobs, and have more energy security too, by being able to get off from the larger grid when you, let's say, have a fire in California. And so I do think there's a long way to go, but there are ways, as you said, Crystal, to try to participate in a way that you feel is meaningful and inclusive.
Yeah, go ahead, Kirk.
Oh, no.
You're good. Okay, so I do have a question for you, though. I know you recently reported on, it's related, report on tensions around land use, especially with respect to the energy transition. And I believe recently you've been reporting on indigenous populations protesting mining that are intended to support the Biden administration's intention to transition to electric vehicles. Can you speak to that tension?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We actually talked about it briefly on the earlier panel about greenwashing, because there are a lot of accusations of greenwashing going on by opponents of these large mines that are needed for a clean energy transition. If you could call it that. I mean, that's another subjective term, because is it really clean? No energy is really clean. All energy is going to take impacts, but one of the most concrete examples of this, if you were to travel to probably one of the most remote places I can think of in the western U.S., and I go to a lot of remote places, so that's the qualification, is a place called Thacker Pass. It's in northern Nevada, and it's just a couple miles from the Oregon state line. The nearest metropolitan area is Winnemucca on one side, and then Boise on the other side. I'm being a little glib. They're not major metropolitan areas, but it is the site of what is billed as the largest lithium deposit known in the U.S. Most of the issues around critical energy or critical minerals, that are needed for EV batteries and also cell phones are a lot of them come from countries that are not considered allies of the United States, maybe don't have as robust of environmental laws that we have here in the U.S. and Canada. And most of these minerals are also processed in China, Brazil, coming here. So the argument is we need to be doing more of this here, and there's a whole infrastructure being set up in Nevada in particular. One little problem. This lithium deposit sits on land that's considered sacred to a number of West Coast tribes who had their own Trail of Tears at one point that's less publicized, and were moved off their land and put in places where there weren't many minerals. To the south, bear with me, in Arizona, the Apaches are a great example. Their ancestral land included a site of a large copper mine now that's called Oak Flat. That's land considered sacred to the Apaches that was on their ancestral land. But that copper mine is being pushed by Rio Tinto and the Biden administration to a certain extent as necessary for this transition. If we're really going to transition across the transportation sector and make our entire transportation sector electric, we're going to need copper, we're going to need lithium. So the tribal activists, and to say that there is a problem in the news media, it's not a monolith. There are many Native people who are eager to get the jobs in the lithium mine, but it's sitting on land that's considered sacred. It's the site of an ancient massacre. This is information that has come out recently that the federal government says it was not privy to. So there's a whole other host of issues around that about Native people and oral traditions and some of the stories not being told, or a fear of outsiders for very many good reasons. So this mine in particular in Nevada is being litigated. So it sort of illustrates this difficult position I think we're all put in to ask our own selves, well, we do need to transition to clean energy, but do we need that much energy? Do we need to be consuming at the levels we are? And who's in the way? Or who's going to be asked to sacrifice again? Indian country, many people will give you a litany of examples of treaties that were broken and violated over the years. So this one small example, well, it's a pretty big example, in a very remote corner of the West is illustrative of the big challenges facing when it's one thing to say you're going to transition to clean energy, but what does that look like? And you're going to have to get the minerals from somewhere that are needed. There are countless examples. I gave two of this going on in Arizona and Nevada, but it's definitely something to watch, and it puts, to sum up, it certainly puts the Biden administration in a real bind, because the Biden administration President Biden has said, we're going to right the wrongs of Indian country. We're going to put Native people at the table. We're going to install the nation's first indigenous cabinet secretary, who has not said anything about this mine, Deb Haaland. I think that's illustrative of the tensions around it. So it's something that's unfolding. It's something I think we all need to take a hard look at because it raises some really tough questions.
Thanks, Kirk. And so in your reporting there and from others' reflections, we've had a pretty heavy emphasis on technical jobs and the technical and technological opportunities to aid in all these transitions. What skills or jobs do you see in your work that are contributing to addressing these issues that aren't technical? We'll start with you, Mary.
I think, as I mentioned, I think the agricultural sector is ripe for transformation. I think that's a lot of different types of jobs if you think about local communities as well as large multinational corporations that are, in that touch the ag sector. I think the financial sector is in the midst of a transformation. I think I saw a statistic that by 2025, 50% of all assets under management will be managed to some type of ESG, environmental social governance criteria. I think risk management activities are being transformed across the private sector right now as we experience more and more billion-dollar-plus weather-related events every year. I do think data scientists are needed really to support some of these transformations that are required. But then again, I think sustainability is very local, and it happens in communities. And so there are many different opportunities and roles at a local level that are needed to really support a just and sustainable transition. So I don't think there's, I don't see one field in particular. I don't see one career path in particular. I think there are many pathways and many areas of expertise that are really needed to support a more sustainable future.
Maybe I'll just add that I was a liberal arts major, and my oldest daughter, when she was contemplating what she was going to study, I encouraged her to also go into liberal arts, and she was an English major. And I know that's really not the trend these days, but there are plenty of jobs for people who can think critically and are creative. I think somebody else mentioned that on the panel earlier. We need a lot of people to start companies, to solve problems, to develop solar, to develop charging stations. And really that really gets down to being able to analyze, think critically, communicate. And so I think there are a lot of non-technical jobs out there and available to folks.
I think I completely 100% agree with what the both of you mentioned. I want to make sure that people realize and understand that we're having this conversation, and it's not a will this happen, is it a hypothetical? It actually kind of has to happen. And then on top of that, US-based companies will have to modify and change, if not with the rules that are happening here in the US, but because of rules that are happening in Europe. What we're waiting for right now is the European Union is going to issue some corporate sustainability reporting directive that's supposed to come out. And a third of the companies that they expect to have to report to this are US-based companies. So about 300,000 companies will have to figure out their ESG reporting requirements, and they'll have to answer about 83 questions that the European Union may have about their supply chain. So regardless of whether there are shifts and changes in rules that come out in the US, things that happen globally impact companies here in the US and will potentially shift and change the way US corporations operate. So I want to make sure that we understand that we're no longer existing in a economy by which our borders are closed. We're very much in a global economy, and things that happen in other countries impact us here, and things that impact us here also impact other countries. When Kirk was talking about the need to mine critical minerals, absolutely right. A lion's share of the minerals that exist to support renewable energy, whether that's vehicles and such, are either out of Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, and China. Majority.
Yeah.
So very much so policies that we make here impact the rest of the world and also vice versa. So I think it's also critical and important to make sure that you have an understanding of the historical context about things. And one example I give is, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Love Canal. If I can query the audience, how many of you have heard of Love Canal before? Right. So Love Canal is, for those who don't know, Love Canal is a critical example of a corporation that, made a decision to buy land from a city. As the city, in essence, sold them the land. They turned the land into a dump. They capped it, filled it with dirt, and resold it back to the city. The city built low-income homes on it and an elementary school, and then it took about maybe 20 to 30 years later for people who were living in the community to realize that they were living on a toxic dump and were dealing with various forms of cancer. Then it got to the point in which the Carter administration got into place and then decided to move the community. Now, the actions of the corporation took place before the Environmental Protection Agency even existed. And to say that it's a matter of decisions that happen without rules that are in place also impact us in present day. So in order for us to chart a pathway that makes sure that we protect our future, we have to also understand all the ills and wrongs that have happened in the past. So this is understanding how the fossil fuel industry has impacted communities, because the same impacts that those communities have had, the impacts that those industries have had on communities can happen with this transition to renewable energy. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We know what could potentially happen, but we also have to get ahead of it and try to figure out solutions to make sure that we mitigate against those. So I think, it goes along the lines of, again, there is a roadmap that we've taken. There is a roadmap that we want to take into the future, but I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that the steps that we take are those that, create the least amount of harm for the most people.
I was thinking, just to wrap that up, maybe like advice to people coming into the job market is maybe tune out the hyperbole a little bit. Like you had mentioned that there are examples of bad actors in the corporate world, but in a lot of cases, we'll go back to the example of Wyoming and coal. The market has been moving away from coal long before it was even talked about on the federal level, right? Mm-hmm. So these systems have been in place, and it's striking to watch in Wyoming and my home state of Montana, which were highly coal dependent, also highly timber dependent. But it's, you can hear the politicians continuing to say that there's a place for coal, and there may be in a little bit, but Wyoming, King Coal, all of the coal-fired power plants are going to shut. There's a plan in place. There are almost 24 of them, and they're going to shut down. Now, part of that is much of that has been driven by the West Coast, where all the people are, where all the energy consumers, where these states have always shipped their power. So that's happening. And there are going to be a lot of jobs in that transition. So I guess I would say, like, maybe it's difficult as a reporter to make recommendations like that, but maybe try to tune out the hyperbole a little bit in our hyper politicized cable TV news market, where green jobs, for instance, like if you're watching Fox, I'm just totally speaking out of conjecture here, but if you're watching Fox, a green job is a West Coast Subaru hippie driving guy driving to the cannabis plant, or if you watch, or the granola plant, or if you watch maybe MSNBC, the guy working the transmission line at the wind power plant is a climate crusader on the front lines of the clean energy revolution or something like that. But just try to tune some of that out, because there's going to be a lot of jobs needed in this transition that's happening, whether people like it or not.
Thanks, Kirk. So we're now at just about 15 minutes, so I want to start to transition. I'll stop saying that word eventually. To questions. And so I'm going to do kind of a choose your own adventure here, because we have two questions looking at populations that we haven't talked about yet today. One is asking about advice for those in later stages of their careers around engaging in green. And then the other is how do we support students leaving high school and not going on to college? So how do we think about green jobs and careers for those who will not pursue a college degree? So you can choose between those two or try to do both. I wish you luck. Mary, do you want to start?
Yeah, so what I kind of termed out, but I was on the board of a nonprofit called Grid Alternatives. And Grid Alternatives, there's a chapter of it here in Colorado, really is focused on equity in the renewable energy markets and making sure that low-income communities benefit both from job opportunities as well as low-cost renewable energy. And there are a lot of trades and training programs, not nearly enough, frankly. I think we fail as a society in that. I think Europe is much better than that. I have a niece and nephew in Germany that are in the trades tracks, and they've been taking or doing jobs starting in middle school that to train them for trades, and we don't do enough of that here. So I think that is an opportunity, frankly, that's needed, is more of a focus on trades and community college and vocational training, without a doubt. There are pockets, right? So Grid was very good at doing some of that training for non-college educated people, but there's not enough of that, frankly. I think we need more upskilling, and we need more trades training in this country. In terms of later in career, I think I'm a good example of kind of stepping out of the corporate world, looking for a nonprofit opportunity that's very value aligned. I think there are those opportunities. You're not going to make the same kind of income, but sometimes those trade-offs are okay. And so I think I've done that, and I think that's an opportunity for folks later in career to think about where do they want to have impact, and where can they get involved to best have that impact.
Yeah, maybe I'll just echo a little bit at what you said, Mary. I mean, there's a huge need for electricians, for example. Huge need. And in the EV transition, the solar transition, I couldn't agree more about the trades and trying to get away from this cultural idea that that's the going to college is the route. I also, I like Mary, I've thought a lot about, it's just, what's really cool is we're living a lot longer and we're able to contribute for a lot longer. And I was talking to somebody the other day, I hate the word retirement, because I don't think that's not what happens. We're all engaged. We want to continue to contribute, and how do we do that in a meaningful way? And I think that's an individual journey for each person, but I completely agree with Mary. Maybe that's stepping out of something that is as high paced and maybe the nature conservancy is high, maybe less high stress, and other mentoring I think is huge. I think and I think back when I started my career, how naive I was about so many things, where a mentor could have been incredibly helpful, and I learned a lot the hard way. And I think we are, just even like I was thinking when Kirk was mentioning all the use of lithium and other rare minerals, there are people starting companies left and right looking at ways to develop storage that doesn't use rare earth metals. And like, if you have any kind of competency in that background, there's so much to do right now to find solutions. And I think overall, we all say we want to reduce impact. That's really what's most sustainable. But to the extent that we still are going to need electricity or need, along with energy storage, we do need people to start thinking continually about how to do it less impactfully.
Yeah, there is a role to play for, the trade field. Simply, like, if you have an electric vehicle right now, you take it to a traditional mechanic, they cannot touch your car. Because, if you just talk about some cars having sensors just in the bumper. So there is a need for that area to be upskilled and transition skills. Simply, if you get in a wreck with an electric vehicle, do EMTs know how to even address the uptick in vehicle crash that may happen with electric vehicles? So there's like a whole pipeline of support services that will be necessary and essential for this transition, whether it's in the transportation field, whether it's in the renewable energy field. Electricians friends ask me, do I know electrician? I know none, but I hear they're very hard to find. Those plumbers, across the board, and those are, fields that people actually make a really healthy living doing. So that I do think is critical and important. It's funny, I'm not just saying that from the perspective of a highly educated person, like, yeah, we need tradespeople. My parents were tradespeople. I took shop in high school. I know how to, build a structure for a house because I did Habitat for Humanity. So these are all things that are critical to your life existence, and they also are critical life skills. So there's no need to create a caste system within professions because we all collectively support and work together and need each other. So I do think that it's critical and important for there to be a pipeline for people getting trades, whether that is by an apprenticeship or in some formal sense through community college if there are programs that are available and accessible. That is critical and essential. And I forgot the other part of your question.
Later in career opportunities to engage.
People who are evolving, I like to say, more so than folks who are retiring. When you say folks who are evolving, I have no recommendation there across the board, but I do know that a lot of the advice and counsel that I receive as an individual come from people who are in an evolving state of their life. They are very open and transparent and candid with things that have gone wrong and why things have gone wrong. And I think there's a role to play in terms of mentorship and creating a bridge between folks who are younger in their career, connecting with folks who have evolved out of a traditional career and are now looking for additional opportunities. Because again, a lot of the knowledge that we generate and consume can be read, but a lot of like oral history that people have lived through isn't necessarily passed on. So I do think that there is a role to play in terms of making sure that reminders of when things have gone wrong and reminders of when things have gone correctly and why they went correctly are broadly communicated across generations. So that's off to you, Kirk.
I don't know what else I might add other than I was thinking I live in one of the reddest states in the nation, if not the reddest, with one of the reddest governors in the nation, if not the reddest. Not making any sort of political comment on that, but he is trying to cut a deal where he is going to give every graduating senior a check that encourages them to go into they could go to one of the universities, but go into a trade school, recognizing the high need and demand and kind of an acknowledgement that maybe for too long society just pushed this, or the elite just pushed this, you must go to college, that's how you get ahead. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And this is slightly off topic of green jobs, but there's been a lot of hand-wringing, and I think reasonable hand-wringing about the decline in humanities, people going into the humanities. But think about what's going on at the Supreme Court right now, where they're suddenly casting a net wide to try to find historians who know about these arcane gun laws from the 1800s. So what's the point I'm trying to make there? I think that might be an example of there's a role for people in the job market who aren't ready to retire, who have a broader perspective, who can come in and offer a different take on things. I think we're in this situation right now where many of us think we know everything because we have our phones, and I know everything and I'm right, and and that happens in the workplace a lot too. But I think that there is an increasing demand and there's a different role. We just need to rethink it a little bit.
Thanks, Kirk. And I'm actually going to keep it with you. And then it can come back this way if others have contributions, but I can also ask a different question. But this is a question from a student, and I thought you might have insight based on your reporting. What fields are most at risk of disappearing with the green transition? The thing that I would say is probably fossil fuels, but then again, maybe not, It just may be in a different
in a different facet. Boy, I don't know. That's a good question. Does anybody? I hate to be the guy who's punting, but I don't know off the top of my head what jobs could disappear. It's a good question.
Well, yeah.
Definitely,
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
coal jobs are disappearing, and then what's being replaced is, I think, the second fastest growing job is a wind technician.
But like you say, that's difficult because a lot of these developments are built and there's a lot of short-term jobs, but there aren't as many jobs needed to maintain. You're still not, it's not as labor intensive, right, as a coal mine,
That's right.
a wind farm, so you're not going to need as many jobs. I
A
don't know.
coal-fired power plant,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah.
That's true.
Right. Okay.
Sorry to whoever asked that.
No. Good question. You'll have to find them later and have a conversation. So this question is targeted to Crystal and Kim, although others are welcome to contribute. What are your views on recent legislations promoting clean energy and manufacturing, like the Inflation Reduction Act? Will the billions allocated really trickle down to subject matter experts and tech startups and create job opportunities? Or instead, will it go to big corporate incumbents or just be nice-sounding policies? Sounds like this person has a bit of an opinion. What's yours?
Well, I can't. I'm not in the administration, so I can't speak for the administration. I can say that from what I've read and what I've seen, there is these two bills, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is set out to have rehabilitation of our infrastructure in addition to sort of embedding some of the renewable energy technology that's necessary, and then the Inflation Reduction Act, which is sort of the big tranche of the bill that is going to look at greening and putting more renewables in place. Those pieces of legislation have really put dollars behind where critical need has been seen. Now, whether or not the dollars will flow from the federal government down to states and localities, I would presume so, because it's being written as such that that dollars are being disseminated. From the alerts that I receive in my personal email inbox, just about every other day of every week so far, there has been alerts of whether the Department of Energy is sending dollars to respective states, whether EPA is sending dollars to certain states for water and for clean air. Now, what the regions and states do with those resources is to be determined, because once money moves to the state, they will have to disseminate it. But in terms of the tech question and tech startup question, some of the most viable fundraising opportunities right now in the entrepreneurial and startup space have been for climate tech and clean tech companies. Just earlier this week, there was a new tech company that got $90 million of investments off of an idea for analytics at the intersection of environmental solutioning and some addressing ESG problems. I think they're probably seeing themselves as the Palantir of renewable energy problems and climate energy problems. So I think there are opportunities that exist out there, but whether or not the dollars are going to flow from top to bottom, I can't. That's to be determined.
Maybe I'll just add to what Crystal said. There's a lot of money, and it is going to be very impactful, and it's coming in very many different forms. So the bipartisan infrastructure, a lot of that goes to states and cities and then funded. In the Inflation Reduction Act, you have tax credits. Those are going to go to private companies. There's also, other funding grants that go on bipartisan that go to private entities. You're also seeing in an effort to make it more just. We'll see if it actually is, but I think there's a real effort to do so. For example, you get a higher investment tax credit if you're developing in a low income community. So there's a myriad. I will say it's ambitious, and I think we're seeing, as Crystal said, significant investment. I think people are expecting $1 trillion of investment into climate tech, as a result of it's close to 400 billion benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act.
Can I ask a question about a question? So, like, are there real mechanisms in place for accountability in your guys' view? Because we all know what happened with the coronavirus relief money going to places that businesses, I'm trying to think of some of the big examples that got bailout money that probably didn't need it, but they had a lot of high-powered attorneys and were able to get the money. So I'm just curious, like, do you see the money going to the right spots? Or is it too hard to tell?
That's what you're doing, right? Just making sure it does.
I would say that there are systems in place, and the way in which we've seen NOFO's, Notice of Funding awards, go out is that it does have the underpinning of making sure that equity requirement is in grant applications, and also a reporting requirement that will exist there. So I do think that agencies are putting in place new approaches and methods that didn't exist before to require some reporting of where the resources are being utilized and what benefits and impacts they are having on the ground.
Okay, they're pretty strict with us on time, and we have reached time. So I want to thank you all for your contributions. Thank you all for your questions. They were really valuable. And if you want to talk about the underpinnings of capitalism and whether that's possible to move away and move towards just energy transition without capitalism, come find the panelists.